Hi, everybody, and welcome to Girl Woman. I'm Lara Rathod, and today I will be talking to Darpna about being 40-something. Welcome to the series and the show, Darpna. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you, Lara. I'm excited to be here too. I'm Darpna and I go by the pronouns of she and her. I am 43 and I was born in East Africa in Tanzania. I was 4 years old when I moved here, and that brings me to today. And I'm so excited to be speaking to you too, Lara.
Thank you so much. And yeah, so you came here when you were 4 and you've lived in London ever since, right?
Yeah.
So as you all will notice, Darpna introduced herself in a very specific way, and that's really intentional because what I want is for people watching to see themselves represented and also to help contextualize Darpna's lived experience as she shares. So let's kick off with what four words would you use to describe yourself?
I would say that intuitive describes me well. I've always had a way of kind of tapping into what's going on, reading between the lines, and adapting to things. So I would say I'm very intuitive. Um, Hand in hand with that, I would say definitely compassionate um, and empathetic. So I've always been able to step in other people's shoes and walk their walk and see through their lens. So I would definitely say empathetic if I had to choose between compassionate and empathetic. Mischievous. I like to have fun. I like to play. I like sports. I like to um, prank at home with my husband and children. So I think being mischievous is really important to me, and evolving. I'm ever evolving. I consider myself to be a student of life.
I
Learning is
love
really
that.
important to me. Yeah.
I love that. And it's such a beautiful way to look at ourselves and to look at life, isn't it? To like be a lifelong learner. Because I think that we need to expand the concept of learning to not just be learning as an education, as in getting through school or university or college or whatever. It's really about seeing yourself as an ever evolving being, as you said, and then being able to take the lessons that you've learned, in one decade, apply them, bring them with you into the next decade, and sort of build on what you've learned, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's
So
why this series of yours is just, you know, perfect, isn't it? Because we'll be able to see and travel through that journey of all these women and their journeys through life. So,
yeah, I really love the idea of like learning from people of all ages. It's something that I've always done, and
mm,
that's why I thought the series would be so lovely because it will allow us to sort of a kind of look back and reflect about ourselves in a particular decade, when we're hearing other 20 somethings or 30 somethings or teenagers, talk about where they are at right now. But also, I guess we get to see the growth and the evolution of the world and society as a whole, because I already see that, when I'm
mm,
looking at people in their 20s, they have a very expansive mindset and a very expansive kind of view of the world in just how they don't seem to be constrained by labels. And I really love that about that generation. I think they're the millennials. I'm not even sure now with ages, but I think that that's something that we can all learn from.
yeah, yeah, I
So
agree.
Brene Brown talks about the 40s as midlife, and she's currently doing a 6-part series on her Unlocking Us podcast about her first book, The Gifts of Imperfection. And they've had 2 episodes so far, and they talk about how the 40s are this decade of change. It's kind of you've gone through like being a child, a teenager, you've had like 20 or so years, as a grown up, and then you come to the 40s, and it's like it's a good kind of taking stock time. I've certainly noticed that in my life. How has the 40s like been for you so far as a decade?
Yeah, I can resonate with that for sure. I think that, the 20s were, the flirty 20s, really. It was, I really don't think I knew myself well at all looking back now. It was more about learning life skills than it was about learning about myself.
Mhm.
I think the learning about myself started more in my 30s. I think it started more as I matured and I grew, and the things that I wanted from life, like wanting to start a family and wanting to change careers and thinking about what I want next, actually came to the forefront. And so in my 30s, I started to feel more grounded, more as if I had a voice as well. It was as if the things I wanted weren't within my grasp as such. I couldn't make a baby come about just like that. I had to wait patiently. Um, and so there was a lot of learning about, not getting what it is that you want to achieve in your life. You can't just become a mother because you wish to. And that whole grief and loss process of, wishing and yearning for something, whilst at the same time juggling a relationship, trying to grow in your career, trying to maintain friendships, and trying to do it all, taught me a lot. And so the 30s were really kind of eye-opening, grounding, a time to have to mature. And then children came. I've got two boys, they're 12 and 9. And now that I'm in a comfortable spot with what parenting means to me, how important my career is to me, where I fit into my husband's life and where he fits into mine, where all of that is kind of settled, and a lot of inner work has been done through the 20s, 30s, and 40s. I feel like it's time for the fruit to start to ripen and be ready to pick. I'm learning constantly, but I'm also much more self-aware than I've ever been, and being self-aware has always been a really important aspect to connection with myself, connection with other people, connection to the universe. So 40s for me has given me more clarity than I've had thus far. I'm sure there's more to come, but definitely clarity and grounding, more confidence, I would say.
Wow, I love that. You have given us so much already to like dig into, and I can't wait to do that with you. Um, it's so interesting what you said about the 20s was sort of going off like for playing and like the flirty 20s, and just like you're released from school and university and it's like a playground, right? Like this is what I guess we've been working towards. And so I think of the 20s as more doing, like it was achieving, like getting to where you kind of thought you needed to be. And then
it was also about mistakes. I think,
yeah.
in my teens and my 20s, it was about learning from mistakes. It was about getting it wrong and finally understanding how to get it right, or at least giving it a go in a different way, and maybe you get a different outcome. So, I started my degree in a particular area in computer science, and then I ended up working in investment banking. So it was about being fluid. It was about adapting. It was about um, learning from mistakes, and in all aspects of life. And rather than enabling or allowing them to hold me back, I use them to propel me forward and to grow and to develop and to nurture myself.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Like we're sort of taught as much as possible to sort of avoid, in quotes, mistakes or failure, right? And I actually don't really believe in those words. I have a different interpretation for those words than I did when I was younger, and that has really evolved, I suppose. I suppose for me, like it started like late 30s, and so maybe that like the last 10-ish years, where I actually don't see things as mistakes. I see them as learning experiences. And I think as long as you can take whatever the lesson is, and Oprah says a lot, right? Like that you keep getting sent the same lesson until you actually get it, right? So when you actually get the lesson, then you can kind of embed it and move on. And so maybe also the 20s is this realization, 20s and 30s, as we're evolving, that we realize that actually the whole of life is a process of evolving. You know, it's not that you kind of get to the 40 and you're like, oh, I'm made. It's sort of, yes, like there's certain things that, you know, your sense of self has strengthened if you've done inner work, and we can definitely like dig in to talk about that, because I'm very interested in how do we develop ourselves and know ourselves. But then it's also using that sense of self and that groundedness to then have the freedom, I think, to then explore and maybe like forge our own path. You know, having that grounded sense of self, because it's easier to do when you kind of know who you are. But when you're kind of in your 20s and 30s, I don't think you even know sometimes that you don't know who you are, because you think that, you know, you're operating at the level of what you know about yourself, right?
And that, you know, that is the human ego, isn't it? That is the trapping of you know, the body and the mind that we find ourselves a vessel of, is that, you know, I am the be all and end all, and that, you know, that simply isn't the case, because with every decade I'm learning something different, with every year, with every hour. Through this, I'm sure I'll pick lots up from you. But I think that the idea of failure and mistakes is a really important one. My children will come home, if they've had a test or an exam, and they'll say to me, you know, how they did, and they know automatically that my question is going to be, well, I hope you got something wrong. You know, I hope you made a mistake, because if you've just aced what you've done, then you haven't learned anything. It's the things that you get wrong that you grow from. So I feel like the more my children grow up harnessing that it's okay to get it wrong, not intentionally, but, you know, if you
part of life,
if you messed up, you messed up. As long as you grow from it and you learn from it and you accept responsibility and take ownership, and that's what I can see, that in my 20s I don't think I had ownership of my immaturity, but in the late 20s that started to come about. In my 30s, for sure, I was able to, you know, sit with the uncomfortable stuff rather than avoiding it or pushing it to the side. As we've talked about before, that, you know, to be able to sit with the uncomfortable, and with mistakes usually there's a lot of uncomfortable,
and
that's
uncertainty
when,
as well.
That uncertainty, and
having to relinquish control, in quotes, control, right? When you sort of realize that there are things that are outside of your control, and with that brings uncertainty and discomfort. I mean, that those are huge life lessons that encompass so much in life, so many different areas.
This is it. Yeah, exactly.
I'm really, even though I'm not a parent myself, I have lots of children in my life that I love, and you know, parenting and teaching children in, you know, particular ways is something that I've been thinking about, and then, you know, practicing with the ones in my life for ages. And you and I have a connection because we met through our mentor, Dr. Shafali, who introduced or talks about the concept of conscious parenting. And it sounds to me like the way you described how you're raising your boys and the kinds of things that you're teaching them, that seems very intentional to me. So was that something that you thought a lot about before you became a parent, or has your parenting journey been evolving as you've been, you know, getting comfortable with it?
Definitely evolving. It's a work in progress. I am not the same parent I am today that I was when I first had my babies, for sure.
In what way?
I learn from them. I take from them, but I love to read. I love to find out stuff. You know, my job means that I get exposure to, you know, so many different types of parenting skills, and I have quite a few mentors. In all sorts of different areas, but Eckhart Tolle, who wrote The Power of Now, is very much about being present and about being conscious and about being grounded in here now. So that I found has been a really effective tool for parenting, because what I've noticed myself through parenting my children is that in the early years, when a situation came up, my response wasn't necessarily about the thing in hand in front of me.
Okay.
It might have been about an insecurity of mine or an experience of mine that mirrored that, whether it's bullying or whether it's, you know, eating the right food or other problems that children have. It wasn't guided by being a parent. It was guided by my own insecurities or my own experiences from the past. And in growing and learning to be present, then I was able to have awareness and understanding of where my instant response was coming from, be able to park that, and then ask my child more about what's going on.
For them.
Learn more about how they feel in that present moment. Have them be present. Teach them to feel the uncomfortable feeling rather than take them on a journey of avoiding it. So I'm trying to teach them what I've learned, what's taken me 40 years to learn. I'm trying to implement them living that now, because then I can't imagine. It's going to be spectacular what they'll teach me by the time they're 40. So it's an evolving kind of, I couldn't put one name to my parenting style because I don't think it has to be one style. I think it has to fit the child.
Yeah.
And as I have more than one, my parenting style can change from one child to the other in the fairest possible ways, obviously. But, you know, everyone's needs are different. And everyone's situationship is different. You know, the problem that one child faced 3 years ago, when the younger one catches up to that, it might look different.
So yeah, let's dig a bit into this, because what I'm hearing you saying is a few things. One is that you have to look at the child that you have in front of you and who they are as a human, as opposed to any assumption or projection or desire or want of your own. And the second thing is recognizing that where in a family there is more than one child, the child is not a cookie cutter, you know, fitting into the little, this is just the definition of a child. Every child is a separate and unique individual with their own needs, with their own temperament, with their own sort of thoughts and feelings and emotions and reactions to things. And so it's really important to sort of really parent the child in front of you, but also what you said, which was so important, is the realization that when you were reacting initially, you were actually driven by unconscious things within you. And so you had to then look inside you to figure out what was going on there. And I think that's pretty revolutionary, actually.
Oh,
and it's so difficult. I mean, if we just think of ourselves, right? It's so difficult to create change in ourselves because we're used to being ourselves. We're used to doing things in a particular way. You know, we've been conditioned by society and culture and families and, you know, everything we see around us. So even to create a tiny change in ourselves is hard. Like, it has to be an intentional thing. And so then to do that, but then also have to navigate a parent-child relationship, I think it's incredible. And as you said,
that's
go.
the word. That's the word. The important word in what you've just said is the relationship. So I come at it from a perspective of removing the parenting from the situation. I take the parent hat off and I put the relationship hat on. So it's about my relationship with this child and my relationship with that child, his relationship with me and his relationship with me. And when I talk to them from that perspective, we're not equal. I'm still the parent, they're still the child, but there's a different level of understanding, sensitivity, and hearing. And then I can really hear what my child is saying, because we have a relationship where we are connected, where there is respect, where there is compassion, in the sense of, to be compassionate, you have to feel equal with the
You're
other
removing
person.
the hierarchy. Yes, of course, you're the parent and they're the child, but you're removing the traditional hierarchical approach of being a parent,
Yes,
and
and
you
and
must
I
do this kind of.
yes,
Yeah.
and it's so difficult to describe. I'm trying to figure out the terminology for it. It's not that I'm
No,
their friend, and
you're doing a great job. Yeah,
it's
yeah,
the first time I'm trying to vocalize it. So,
yeah.
but it's not that I'm their friend, and it's not that I'm their mum. It's that me human, you human, we are conversing, we are communicating. I have to ask the right questions so that my child can get in touch with what they are going through.
And in asking the right questions, like I hear from that why do we ask questions? We ask questions because we're curious. We actually want to know, right? So you need curiosity in order to do that. You need compassion, as you said, compassion and empathy to feel with somebody, right? And I think so often, this expands beyond parenting, because in relationships, I think we all just want to feel seen and heard and valued and appreciated for who we are, rather than who somebody or society expects us to be. And so what you're doing is you're modeling that interaction and that relationship from such an early age, and that by modeling it with them, that becomes their reference point for then all future relationships in their lives. So like, look how powerful, right? It's such a powerful catalyst. And so, like, you said that you had a lot of mentors, around this, and you sort of take from, lots of different areas. Can you share for anybody that might be curious and want to start, going down this rabbit hole and understanding a little bit more?
Oh, do you know that I feel like we live in a time where there is access and exposure from so many different angles. You just need to go onto Instagram or Facebook and type in, fussy eater or difficulty with sleeping, and you get a plethora of people. And it's not it. Yes, I've read about Dr. Shafali's work. There's Eckhart Tolle, as I've spoken to you about before, who I think, his work about being present is so fundamental to the way we live in our family. And there are so many mentors out there, but also my friendship group is a mentor group for me. And I don't mean just the mummy groups, but friends that I've had since childhood, cousins that I have, my parents-in-law, my parents, my siblings. We talk about the problems that we've got with our children, or the things that are going really well with our children, and why that's happening, and sharing with one another about what works well and what doesn't work well. I think is so important. So I quite often like to write about the nuggets of things that really resonate with me, because writing has always worked really well for me. And so that's why I set up, very reluctantly, an Instagram account where I could put my little nuggets of try this, or have you thought about that, or this epiphany came to me one morning, and I shared that. And there are lots of really great forums on Mind Valley. There is Little Humans. There's an amazing journal which is called
Big Life?
Big Life Journal. Big Life Journal. I absolutely love that. I mean, their Facebook page and their Instagram page is full of printouts and handouts and activities, and it's a phenomenal wealth of material. A recent book that Dr. Shafali, together with
Really Jane
goes in. Yes, their book, Superpowered. It's incredible, and there are a lot of tools and skills in there that are adapted in a way where they're really current, and they're really easy for children to resonate with. And they use a lot of NLP, which is a methodology that I'm really excited about and I work with, which you know about, which is neuro-linguistic programming. And so it comprises of all these things together in Superpowered. So that's another great medium that I highly recommend to parents out there. So it's, you know, it's about engaging, it's about talking, it's about reading and sharing, and there's no better group than your mum's group.
And I agree with you, like the power of social media. You know, I know that social media gets a lot of knocks, and there are some, you know, very kind of toxic elements of it. But I also think that for me, forging connections with people who have similar interests and then learning, you know, what this content and that content. And now like my social media feed is just so nourishing and I learn every single day from it. And so I definitely agree with you that, you know, when you have questions and you want to find answers, there's a wealth of information out there. And I've got the Superpowered book. I haven't read it as yet, but yes, I think that also would be an amazing resource, especially, I mean, very well timed, right? Because of the pandemic and everything, and children's mental health, you know, and all of our mental health being challenging, you know, as we're facing this global collective trauma. But that's the power of Superpowered. It's to really tap into things that children are struggling with right now, and to give them the tools to be able to support them through that. Yeah. And that's sorry.
And it goes back to our conversation about relationship.
Yeah.
Because what I want to harness with my children and with my husband and my friendships and all my relationships is not just that one-to-one relationship, but also your relationship with yourself, because that ultimately has an impact on how you relate and communicate with other people. So I'm so passionate about wanting to learn about what is my relationship with myself, what is my relationship with trust, with values, with my belief system, with my identity, with my nationality, with you know, it goes on and on and on. And when you explore that within yourself and you ask questions to your friends and your family about, you know, what's your experience with that, that's when you get to have those meaningful conversations and you get that meaningful connection that shows you that, you know, that real you and the real me.
Yes, I've always found conversation is the gateway to connection. It's like one of my favorite phrases. I say it a lot. And it's true. It's kind of like when you can get below the surface level conversations and actually talk about the things that you're dealing with, or the things that you're struggling with, or things that you're a bit stuck. You know that there's an issue, but you're not really sure of what to do with it. When you can have that kind of heart-to-heart conversation where you're stripping away the surface layer, it can be so nourishing to have these kinds of relationships in your life, because we learn from each other.
Yes, and imagine being a child or a teenager or a, you know, an early 20s and being able to access that. Yeah. That's what I want my children to have, for them to know now and have some conversation or some sort of internal understanding of how they feel about trust, how they feel about their beliefs and all these relationships with big themes within themselves, because then their relationship with school and their relationship with love and with career will all turn out differently, I imagine, if fear is gone and there is greater understanding of the self. So, you know, it all is encompassing, and I don't know how to flesh it out, but somehow you're managing to flesh it out with me now, so that's great.
Well, the other thing is that what's so important, I think, for children to see is that there's one thing when their parents tell them things, right? But children learn the most from watching, and children pick up on everything. And so I heard the saying that, you know, children learn only two things from their parents. Number one, how to treat themselves. And number two, how to treat others. And, you know, sounds, oh, only two things, but those two things basically govern the whole of the life experience. And so if you think about, you know, a child coming up and hearing, you know, their parent kind of criticizing themselves, like, oh my God, I put on weight or whatever. I mean, these are like things that we do all the time, right? And we do them unconsciously because they've become so part of, you know, culture, this kind of berating ourselves. And we can talk about for women where that comes from. But when a child hears that, they might not really understand it, but that little seed will kind of sit within themselves. And if then it isn't clarified, I think then they just start forming conclusions about themselves and extrapolating. And so it's huge, it's totally huge. And then in terms of how to treat other people, you know, somebody can say a thing, but if their behavior is different, I mean, not like complete opposite, but even just a little different, this is all information that's like weaving its way into a child's psyche. And so I think by modeling it, because you are, as you said at the beginning, you know, you're a curious person and you're a lifelong learner and you want to ask questions and seek answers. By living your life in this way, I think you are modeling that so beautifully for your children.
Thank you.
And I commend you for that.
Oh, thank you. It means a lot. Thank you. We are, you know, I was born a blank canvas. You were born a blank canvas, and so were they. And, you know, I see it as my role, but more than that, something I'm passionate about, to ensure that as far as I have access to that canvas, that I enable them to have the most brightest colours on there, and for them to be able to have a canvas that is full of opportunity and positivity and self-worth. And the impact on the canvas comes from the environment, your family, the people you're exposed to, the situations you're exposed to, culture, society, the trappings of gender, and, you know, the list goes on and on and on about the expectations that come at us from all directions. And it starts from the early years. So, you know, all I can do is, having learned from the trappings of my 40 years, that those things that I have gleaned, I can try and give them a nugget of. And if they choose to harness that and that fits them, then great. If it doesn't, that's fine too, because I can't also expect to create perfection, because that doesn't exist.
Perfection doesn't exist.
You know, Brené Brown's book.
I think we need to say that again. Perfection doesn't exist.
It doesn't. And, you know, Brené Brown is a mentor as well. I mean, I would add her to that list. I mean, the list, my list, on and on and on. And, you know, her book, The Gift of Imperfections, is fantastic. You know, and one of the big themes in that is the impact of shame in life. Yes. So, you know, the tricky things that come into life come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, and sometimes they enter us in a way we don't even know that they're there. And shame is one of those. You know, it's one of those kind of intangible, hard to quantify, difficult to describe traits, experiences, feelings, I don't know, all of
emotions,
that. Emotion, everything. And it's a tough one.
It totally is. And another thing is that there's been a lot of talk, right, about raising boys. Well, we're living in a patriarchy, and in a patriarchy, you know, there are sort of archetypes and stereotypes that people play into, right? The expectations of boys and men to be XYZ, and the expectations on girls and women to be ABC. And so another thing that I think is really great is that it sounds like you're being very intentional in raising your boys to allow them the fullest expression of, you know, feeling their feelings and allowing the difficult emotions, and not being so scared to like push them down, but you're exploring that with them, so that they start to understand, because these are really hard emotions. And I think if you start to understand them earlier in whatever the age appropriate way is, then you're building on that information and getting used to it, and then not feeling so scared to basically, when you have an emotion that culture and society deems bad, in quotes, like anger or shame or whatever, you're not so overcome by it that you need to run away.
Yeah, there are boundaries, invisible ones, that society and culture and gender and all these, isms place on boys and girls. And, we have a duty of care as parents and, godparents and aunts and uncles and everyone as a society, to talk about whether they are realistic now, whether we need them in place now. Where they are in place, what are the repercussions? What has the fallout been? What do women really want? What do men really want today, as opposed to the things that have just come along and we just accept as being the way that they are. And yes, I do make sure we have lots of conversations about things like that, especially over lunch and dinner. And I know I've shared some of those with you in the past before, about, how, what is the feminist, and, what is vegetarianism, and why veganism, and,
anything can be a teaching
Brexit and COVID, and should we have the injection vaccines, should we not? It goes on and on and on. That's really important. Debate is important.
And having conversation, having the safety to be able to like voice anything, and that goes with all relationships, right? Relationships it's incumbent to have trust and safety in them for them to be healthy relationships. Okay, we're coming up to time, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring part 1 to a close, and we're going to be back with Darpna in part 2. So thank you very much, and we'll see you in part 2.
Wonderful, thank you.